Hello everyone and welcome to a very exciting game from round 6 of the 2019 Sinquefield Cup. It's Viswanathan Anand versus Anish Giri, and sorry about the video freezing all the time in the previous video. I have no idea why this keeps happening. I'm gonna have to get a new PC, obviously, as this is not the way to go. But I will try to improve on it and check if the video lags before uploading it. I usually do check, but I don't check the entire video. I just check a few segments of the video and then decide to upload it. So really sorry about that. But on the other hand, you also had a chance to practice your blindfold analysis. So without further ado, Anand versus Giri. Anand opens with the white pieces. We have e4, and the Giri goes for the Sicilian defense. We have c5, knight to f3, e6, and d4. Just the standard stuff. We have knight captures, knight to f6. Knight captures on d4, knight to f6, knight to c3, and now knight to c6. With a3, preparing b4 at some point, with bishop to e7 and f4 by Anand. With d6, knight back to f3, avoiding the trade in the center, also preparing e5 maybe in some cases, with castles by Giri and bishop to d3. With a6, preparing b5, castles by Anand, and now b5. And here, not allowing black to push b4 himself, Anand pushes b4. And Giri goes for a5. As Anand's dark square bishop still isn't developed, Giri can play a5, and now you cannot capture on b5, for example. If knight captures, just pawn captures on b4, and you cannot recapture, the rooks are not connected. So after a5, we have rook to b1, Giri trades, a captures on b4, a captures, and now d5. So already Giri able to execute d5, which is of course very good for him. And there is one game in the database from 1984 where e captures on d5 was played, but Anand improves on it with e5. So it's as of move 14 that we have a completely new game. Now Giri could go for knight g4, seems like a nice square for the knight, and if Anand wants to kick it away from there, he's going to have to further weaken his king side, but Giri prefers knight to e8. We have knight captures on b5, grabbing a pawn, but only temporarily. Bishop to a6 by Giri, knight back to d4, and now knight captures on b4. Just grabbing that pawn, and now comes bishop captures on a6. Bishop captures with rook captures on a6, and now finally, after all has been said and done on the queen side, Anand starts the attack on the king side with f5. And the Giri doesn't like the idea of the potential f6, so he captures. E captures on f5, the rook can now also help out with the defense, but also maybe even as an attacking piece. With knight captures on f5, and now knight back to c7. With c3, preventing d4, also making a nice outpost for the knight on d4, knight to c6, and now queen to d3. A very nice move as it pressures the h7 pawn, but also the rook on a6. So for example, if black plays something like rook e8, you can just play captures, rook b7, threaten to capture the knight. Also the rook will then be vulnerable, and white just gets a whole lot of activity. So Giri gets the rook out of the way right away, rook to a4, and now finally developing the bishop to e3. We have rook to e4, preparing to capture on e5, and here Anand plays bishop to b6, saying to Giri, if you capture on e5, that's just bad. For example, if knight captures, rook captures, you win a pawn, but then bishop back to d4, and you lose your rook. You either have to give it up for the knight, or if you try to save it, for example, rook e4, then you get queen g3 with the threat of mate, and after bishop to f6, knight h6 check. King h8, and now rook captures on f6. And now comes the beauty, after g captures, rook to b8. And now if queen captures, the bishop captures on f6 is mate, and whatever, well, pretty much everything else you do, you're also getting mated. So quite a nice little line. Anand says, nope, you cannot capture this pawn. Giri says, all right, with queen to d7, now attacking the knight on f5, and here comes bishop captures on c7. Queen captures on c7, and now comes queen captures on d5, getting rid of this pawn. And rook to f4 by Giri. So here Anand has a very nice position, a lot of activity. He's up a pawn, and he has to decide what to do here. Yesterday, I don't know, it was already at this moment when I saw the position. I didn't watch the game prior to this, and I thought, wow, what about queen captures on c6 here? It seems like a nice idea. Because if queen captures, knight captures with check, picks up the queen. The problem is after queen captures on c6, you don't capture immediately. First bishop c5 check. You get rid of the bishop, and now of course if queen captures, then you lose the queen. So you block with the knight, knight 3d4. Now black captures the queen. Now you cannot recapture, the knight is pinned, but now the other knight delivers the fork. Check, and well, the queen is now under attack by both knights. Now the bishop will capture the knight back. Knight captures. Now white is not up a piece, and after, let's say, bishop c5 check, you trade a pair of rooks and rook c8. White is still up a pawn, but black will be able to hold this. You will most likely win the isolated c pawn. So very nice idea, but it doesn't work. Anand goes knight 5 to d4, and here he says, okay, I'm threatening to capture your knight. You could move it, prevent me from pushing something like e6 by knight to d8, but also you can just capture on d4. But by capturing on d4, you fix my pawn structure. This is what Giri played, and rook to d8. And now we have queen to b7. Anand up a pawn offers a queen trade. We have queen captures, rook captures, and now king to f8, defending the bishop, also improving the activity of your king. And here, well, Anand played g3 here, and this is not the absolute best way to go about the position. So feel free to pause the video here and try to figure out another way to go about the position while I give you a couple of seconds. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations for excellently going about the position. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, rook to c1 is much stronger, threatening rook to c7, and there you will just have a whole lot of threats along the 7th rank. For example, after black plays g5, he wants to play h5, g4, you're going to play h3, h5, and now whatever, you can play e6, and it's a very hard position for black to defend. Either he captures and you play knight e5, threatening knight g6 check to pick up the bishop, black has to defend, rook f6, and then now you play rook c to c7. Now you're threatening to win the bishop. Either you're gonna play rook e8 and then face knight d6 check, which loses the rook, or you're gonna move the bishop. Let's say you try bishop d6, but then you get rook to h7. Now the threat is rook to h8 mate, and after king g8, now you play rook bg7 check, king to f8, and now finally knight to d7 check is sufficient for a win. As you win material and of course the game. On the other hand, after let's say this e6 move, black can play f6, prevent knight e5. It's not a problem. You still play rook over to here, threaten the bishop, and after you defend the bishop, then you push d5. You're gonna play rook d7. d6 is coming, and with two connected pass pawns on the 6th rank, this is a winning position for white. So Anand missed rook to c1. Here he played g3 first. Maybe he thought about rook to c1 on the next move. The problem is after rook f5, you can no longer play rook c1 as the knight here would be hanging. So here Anand first defends it, but now Giri finds f6. And now the same idea no longer works, because after rook c1, captures on e5 first, d captures and g5. Yes, you can go rook c to e7, but black now has g4. This is the difference. Now, if you move the knight, then rook d2 check. If you capture on e7, then you get captures with check, king f1. Rook d1 check, you're gonna go king to f2, rook d2 check, king to e3, and now f2. Preparing to bring a queen into the game, but after rook captures on h7, it doesn't matter what black does. Black will not be able to win because there's always the threat of checkmate. You can just play king g8 here, and after white moves the rook, go back, and so on. It doesn't even work if you want to pick up a knight with check, because after king to e4, the rook is under attack, and you can't prevent both threats, this mate and this mate. With best play, it would definitely be great for white. So after this f6 idea, we have rook to e1, so that's why it doesn't work here, but you know, it would be a draw. Rook to e1 by Anand, f captures on e5, d captures on e5, and now h5 with e6 by Anand. Now it's a very strong pawn, but it can also be a very weak pawn depending on what happens. With g5 by black, and now comes rook to e2. We have rook to d6, going after the d6 pawn, and now h3. G4, we trade a pair of pawns, h captures, and knight to h4, threatening knight to g6 check to pick up the bishop. So rook to g5 defending, and now rook to a7. Anand wants to go to the 4th rank, although he doesn't want rook b4 since the bishop is kind of controlling the b4 square. King e8, now comes rook to a4, and rook to d3. We have rook to a8 check, Giri of course blocks, and rook back to a1. We have rook d to d5, sorry, that's rook g to d5, rook d to d5, and now comes rook to f2. We have bishop back to d8, and now rook to a8. So still not clear on how to improve on your extra pawn. We have king to e7, now going after the pawn, rook e2 defending. We have rook to c5, and now comes rook to a6. Defending yet again, not allowing rook to c6 to attack the pawn. We have rook to a5 now, offering a trade. Rook to c6 and rook 8 to d5. And here, rook to f2. We have rook back to d6, offering a trade. We have rook captures, king captures, and now rook d2 check. If king captures, then you lose the bishop on d8, so rook to d5. We have rook captures on d5, king captures, and knight to f5 now, but there is no saving the pawn. King captures on e6 is played, knight to e3. Now you cannot go after the pawn, but Giri just plays bishop to c7, of course. Knight captures on g4, and here after bishop captures on g3, the players agree to a draw, as now it is a draw. After king captures, a draw by insufficient material. So very exciting game, a lot of things happening. First, Giri's counterattack on the queen side and the center, then Anand's attack on the king side, then a couple of missed chances, and in the end, well, a well-fought draw up until the end. I mean, a draw by insufficient material means there was it was a good game. So yeah, that's the game from round 6. All the other games from round 6 were also drawn, so there is no change in the standings. We're not even going to show it, although maybe just a glimpse. It's oh, sorry about that. It's the same one I've shown you in the previous video, so nothing different there. Everyone has a half a point more, but I didn't update the table. But the standings are the same. But yeah, I would like to thank Val Persson, Matthew Heath, Mario Encinosa, Mr. M.E. Kogan, and Ian Hayes for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Sinquefield Cup, continuing the Capablanca saga, and finishing it, and of course checking up on your wonderful suggestions. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your weekend.